All right, bear. What if I told you that, this word is interesting, but why? It's not interesting because of the way it's pronounced. It's not interesting because of the way it's spelled. And it's not even interesting in, like, it's used. In fact, if I didn't tell you why this word was interesting, you would probably never know unless you were, like, you know, really into this kind of stuff. But the reason that this word is interesting is because of where it comes from. The word bear comes from the Proto-Germanic word barrow, meaning the brown one. The reason that this is interesting is because, one, Proto-Germanic was spoken 3,000 years ago, and it's the language which Old English came out of. But two, because they already had a word for bear. It was arthas. The people who spoke this language chose to use another one, barrow. But why? It was because they were afraid of bears. These speakers, who come from the regions we now know as Sweden, Denmark, and Germany, you might recognize those places as places that might have bears, you know? So these people were also quite superstitious and believed that by saying the bear's name, it would attract the bear. So they instead decided to call it the brown one, which became barrow, and then which became bear in English. This is a reconstruction of how the word would change into English if we had kept using the word arthas instead of, you know, changing to the word barrow, which turned into the word bear. First, we have arthas, the original word which was used by the Proto-Germanic people. Then, we would have gotten arda. This would have changed, you know, because words change over time and how they're pronounced, and we can usually figure out how these words would change based on rules from just, like, you know, there are just rules for these kinds of things. Then it would have changed into earth in Old English, which would have been bear. I'm just telling you, I'm just going to say bear a whole bunch of times. And then earth would have changed into arth in modern English. Hi, I am Max Beals, and welcome to my Masterworks. All right, here's a table of contents because we like to know where we're going. The first part of my Masterworks will be some important terminologies that you should know to understand the rest of my Masterworks. Then I'm going to summarize how languages work. And then lastly, I am going to explain, well, not lastly, then I'm going to explain how writing systems work. And then we'll get into the kind of the second part of the Masterworks, the stories that are told by words. And then we'll get into the conclusion, terminology. The first words you need for my Masterworks are etymology, Proto-Indo-European, and Indo-European. To start, etymology is the field of tracking down where a word came from, like I just showed with the word bear and, oh, wrong map, sorry, arda, and then arth and bear, all that. That's etymology. It's also like how the word table comes from the Latin word tabula. The second two are Indo-European and Proto-Indo-European, and if you couldn't tell by the fact that they sound pretty similar, except one is proto in front of it, they're sort of the same thing. Indo-European is a collection of families that includes English, Spanish, German, Russian, Norwegian, Hindi, Farsi, Greek, and so many more languages. And Proto-Indo-European is the language which all of these languages come from. Now, what does it mean for them to all be related? Like I just said, they all came from one language. This means that if you track the origin of any, you know, same word in English, Spanish, German, Russian, Norwegian, roughly the same word, Hindi, you know, all those languages that I just mentioned, thousands of years, they all likely come from the same word or a word with a fairly close meaning. Let's take a look at the word for mother, which is meter in Proto-Indo-European. This is why the word mother is mother in English, mater in German, mata in Hindi, mat in Russian, madre in Italian, matera in Greek, and maher in Irish. Sorry if I said it wrong in your language. Well, it's not the norm for etymologies to be this clean. There are often a lot of shared roots among most of these languages. Like, you see, they all come from here, sort of. This is a tree for everything you need to know in my explanation. This here is not really a thing. It's just Proto-Indo-European. And the rest of those things that branch off are branches of Proto-Indo-European. It's a little bit less realistic than it actually happened, like the branching of these languages. And the time frame is also wrong. It doesn't really have loanwords or other outcomes of languages being close together either. This should, however, tell you the origins of where most Western European languages come from. To show you why I just told you all that, the name of my Masterworks, Wordlore, has a fair bit of thought behind it. I probably should have added a little bit more in the name just to actually tell you what it's about. But the name is the English word for etymology, or the science of words. No, I did not just say English wrong. Anglish is a real form of English that nobody speaks. It's just English with only Germanic words, meaning that words from French, Latin, or any other of those languages are swapped with Germanic ones that the languages like French and Latin replaced. If I was, hold on, where am I? There's an often held false truth that English is in the Romance group, like French, Italian, Spanish, and Latin. This is false. It's hard to even think of English as a hybrid between these two languages. Two language groups. If I was to speak in a way that only used words that come from Germanic, no one would be able to tell. In fact, for this past slide, I have only used words that come from Germanic. This means that I haven't used a single word that comes from Latin, French, or any other Romance language until now, aside from proper names, demonstrations, and the word language, since it's really hard to give a presentation about languages without being able to say the word language. The reason that this is relevant is because almost 60% of words in English come from either Latin or French. That means until I've just told you, I've been restricting myself to using around 25% of all the vocabulary in English, because there are some other places where vocabulary comes from. This is why English isn't a Romance language, even though 60% of our vocabulary is of Romance origin. The 25% of it that comes from Germanic origin is used way more frequently. The fact that I can give part of a speech without using the Latin or French parts of the English language is why English, 1, doesn't come from Latin, 2, isn't a Romance language, and 3, isn't even a hybrid between the Romance and Germanic languages. The explanation of the name on screen goes deeper. As you can see, I put the etymology of the name on screen. The column in the middle is the language which it came from, and how and when that language is spoken. Word hasn't really changed much, aside from slight vowel changes in the Proto-Germanic use of the suffix "an," which I think marked a case, which I'll explain later, which was lost. You can see here. And that little lowercase h thing that marks that it's aspirated, which we kind of just forgot. Word also, the meaning shifted slightly, and word meant something meant to speak or to say, and it was more a verb, but could be changed into water if you wanted to use it to mean a word. Lore has changed quite a bit more. Coming from Old English lar, there's not much change aside, Coming from Old English lar, there's not much that changed aside from the spelling and some vowel shifts that happened between the 14th and 17th centuries. Lizo to lar is a little bit more complicated to explain, and since it requires some more linguistical stuff. English simplified diphthongs, which is essentially this, which you can see here is a combination of two vowels. The AI just turned into A. And the Z changed into an R through something called rhoticism. Lice changed to Lizo because of something called Grimm's Law. And Grimm's Law, created by the Brothers Grimm, yes, those Brothers Grimm who made the terrifying fairy tales that got turned into Disney movies, Proto-Indo-European words would often turn an S into a Z, and vowels just kind of change over time. The meaning of the word changed a fair bit more as well. Lice meant to gather, Lizo, which meant the same thing, except you could use it to refer to gathering knowledge. This turned into lar, meaning to teach or to teachings, and lar became lore, which means teaching, learning, or just a field of knowledge. A more direct translation from English, which I talked about earlier, which is sort of a language, would be knowledging. So you could say knowledgings, or knowledging as in learning, because it's not really clear whether it means like to learn or to teach. However, if you were to take the Indo-European, just like shift it back in time without, like shift the meanings of the word and the word itself without actually changing the word, like you could see here, word and lice, you would get the word word lice, which literally translates to speaking gathering in Proto-Indo-European. And if you couldn't tell, there might be some parallels here between a speaking gathering and Masterworks. While it might be grammatically wrong, like nothing here is really right, the meaning is still correct, and it would be probably interpreted, like I said, as a social event where people speak. This is the second reason why I chose this name, because it's exactly what Masterworks is, a gathering where people speak. Let's look at some comparisons between words from Germanic. Oh, supposed to click. Let's look at some comparisons between words from Germanic and words from Romance origins. Romance words: construct, comprehend, language, and many more words. Romance words all entered English either during the Norman invasion of 1066, in which French-speaking Normans became the upper classes in England, or during around the 16th centuries and beyond, when scholars took words from Latin and used them in English. These are all Germanic words. Germanic words tend to be shorter and harder than Romance words, and are often simpler concepts in English, like walk, book, man, and more. More is a Germanic word, but I didn't really mean it to, be a word in this context. Germanic words are also the original English words that have stuck around since Old English, albeit having changed slightly. How do languages work? If you were to categorize all languages into two broad categories, there would be synthetic languages, like Latin, Polish, Turkish, and basically all the other European languages except for maybe English. And there would be analytic languages, which would be like Mandarin, English, Vietnamese, Thai, and Burmese. The difference between these two types of languages comes down to the way words are made. In synthetic languages, like you can see here, words are coded with a lot of morphemes. Now, what's a morpheme? It is the single smallest amount of information that you can have here. Like, for example, in Latin, you would say virum vidi. Vir meaning man, and making it the direct object of vidi. Vidi is to see, but you see, vid just means to see, and then the e at the end, or it's actually an I, a long I, makes it the first person saw it. So it would be like I saw, and that would directly translate to I saw a man, or the man. It's not really clear in this context. In analytic languages, however, you would say I saw. In English, I think you can break this down yourself, but I'll just do it. You would say I saw a man. I, meaning that it was first person, saw, past form of to see, indefinite article, which we don't really need, but we have it anyways, and man, which is the singular form of man. Hold on. This is why Canada needs to stop putting our signs in French. Look at just how inefficient this is. I'll break it down for you. So this marks that it's the first person, which is like standard, pretty short, just one letter. But this marks is in the past tense. It looks pretty efficient right now until you realize that they mark it in the past tense again, which they don't really need to do. Sorry, Carrie. Le makes it definite masculine article, but the fact that it's masculine, one, isn't really important since it doesn't matter, two, and secondly, it's already mentioned here. And also, the words are way longer than they have to be. Let's compare it to something like Chinese, which is a lot more efficient in that this is, I'm not going to try to pronounce it, it's wo, but there's a tone on it. Kiana, what does this mean? do you know? Yeah. It's eat, right? But,
do you want to say the whole thing?
Yeah, sure.
All
right, yeah, you heard that. And then it's a lot more efficient. Nope, wrong button. Lot more efficient and lot shorter, too. Now let's get into word order. Some common word orders are subject, verb, object. Oh, I should probably explain what those all mean. So subject would be in the sentence, I eat apples. I would be the subject, since I'm the one eating the apples. The verb in that sentence would be eat, since that's what you're doing to the apples. And then the object in that sentence would be the apples. So some common word orders in a bunch of languages are SVO, which is subject, verb, object, which is used in English, French, and Mandarin. SOV, which is used in Japanese, Turkish, and Korean. And then VSO, or verb, subject, object, which isn't really used that much, but it's used in Arabic, Irish, and Tagalog. 90% of languages either use SVO or SOV. I don't really know why. I just know that they do that because I don't know. But anyways, there are some languages that don't really need a word order since they mark their words with cases. Now, I said I would get into cases, so I'm going to get into cases. Cases. We have, in language, there's basically two types of cases that I think pretty much every language has. We have the accusative case. I'm going to use the laser pointer for this. I slapped him. That would make him the direct object of me slapping him. So he is the object. You wouldn't say he slapped me, him slapped me. You wouldn't say that because him is always the object. And now in the nominative case of he, you would say he slapped me. And that's because he is nominative. You wouldn't say I slapped he, you would say I slapped him. Does that make sense? All right, good. How do writing systems work? There are roughly 3 major groups of writing systems. These aren't it. This is segmental writing systems, which have each character representing really only one sound. So we have alphabets here, which have one sound per character. So for example, everything here just says this is a sample sentence, not in the language, just like transliterated. So if you were to pronounce this, if you were to pronounce this, it would be this is a sample sentence. So each one here only makes one sound. The thing about abjads that's different is that they don't mark where their vowels are. So in languages like Arabic, Hebrew, and whatever this is, they don't mark where their vowels are. Instead, you just kind of have to infer where the vowels are. And then lastly, abudigas, which we have Devangari, Ethiopian Ge'ez, and then I have no idea what this is. I think it's used in Southeast Asia. What they do is they write the consonants and then they mark what vowel sound they will make afterwards. Then there is the second broad group of writing systems, syllables. These ones are much less common, but they're pretty efficient since each syllable is only marked by one character. Yeah, Joe, I know you're laughing. Essentially, this just says this is sample text, not even in Korean. So these ones can encode one syllable per character, which is a lot faster than, as you can see, encoding syllables in like 3 characters. These two, Cherokee and Korean, are the only ones I can name off the top of my head. So yeah, they're less common, but they're more efficient. And then lastly, we have the pretty much only logography that more than 5 people use, which is Mandarin Chinese. And it is used by quite a few people, actually, because it is the most natively spoken language in the world. These ones are even more efficient than syllables because they encode one word per character. Now, let's get into basically the second part, but it's actually the 4th part of my Masterworks. How words tell stories. Whoops. T. T is one of the most interesting words in the English language, and for good reason. But why? It's not because of the spelling or how it's used, just like bear. It's not how easy of a word it is to say, but it's because of its origins. The word tea comes from the Chinese word te, which means tea. It was spread when English traders traded with the Fujian region of China, and they called the product tea. If you're Chinese, however, or you speak Chinese, you'll realize that this isn't the word that is used in Chinese for tea, or Mandarin Chinese at least. They use cha, which is the second word that every single language can use, except for like a few, for tea. There are 2 words for tea in every language, except for basically Polish, Lithuanian, and some of the other languages around there, and Zulu and Burmese. Burmese, I think, has a native word for tea, so does Zulu, and then Polish, Lithuanian, and Belarusian all use a word they stole from Latin, and Latin stole from tea, so it's just herbata. And this is why there are only 2 words for tea in every language. Let's look at the word orange. Orange has possibly the most chaotic etymology of any word that I know of. It originates from Sanskrit naranga, which means orange tree, which then got stolen into Persian narang, which then got stolen into Arabic naranj, which then got stolen into Old Italian narantia. Now, that kind of sounds like orange, but when it got borrowed into Old French was when it really started to sound like orange. In Old French, the une narange, the N at the start of orange, narange, kind of got assumed to be part of une. So instead of becoming une narange, it became une orange. And then that got borrowed into Middle English as orange, which we now know as orange. Lastly, probably the weirdest one here, assassin. Where does the word assassin come from? It comes from the Arabic word hashashin, which means people who smoke hash. It's a bit of a random choice for a word for assassins. But essentially, there was a group of people in 1090 called the Hashashin, or Nizari Ismailis, who were known for assassinating people that they didn't like. Hence, the word Hashashin kind of became used as a derogatory catch-all term for assassins. This word was taken from Arabic and got turned into the Italian word assassino, which became the word assassin in English. Acknowledgements. Kind of a short presentation, but I'd like to thank my Masterworks advisors, my aunt Elizabeth Sarasola, Pete Scott, and Brad Cotter for being incredibly helpful in actually making my essay readable and not just be a 14-year-old rambling about something that could be or could not be adjacent to languages. I'd like to thank Jennifer Hendrickson for scaring me into doing my work. I'd like to thank my brother Storm for being an absolute nuisance. I'd like to thank my parents for trying to tell me stuff that I either ignored or forgot. And I'd like to thank Ema for not threateningly at all, kindly asking to be in my acknowledgements. And lastly, thank you to ChatGPT for writing my essay. I'm just kidding. Questions?
Well done, Mr. Beals. You learned a lot, and I think we'll learn more even through these questions. So off to your advisory team.
Thank you, Mr. Beals. Your advisors couldn't attend in person. They're streaming in. So on behalf of the panel, we have a few questions for you. Because there was a lot in your Masterworks paper that you didn't talk about here. It was a tough choice what to put into the presentation. But before we do that, I'm going to give you something called a portmanteau, a made-up word by putting two words together. I'm going to call it brain squeeze, because that's how it was like working on this paper with you. It was an incredibly interesting journey. I love the conversations we had, so many curious things, and you can take a word like bear or tea and make it genuinely interesting. So a couple of things, and these are in no particular order, but maybe I can start with this feeling I had. You know, I arrived at this school about a year ago and started to get back into working with young people, and there was a point where I said to you, I'm feeling kind of skibbity now. And that was the reaction you gave me. And then you gave me this marvelous explanation why I can't say that. Can you share that with everybody?
So there are just some words like skibbity that just aren't funny anymore, if you know what I mean. Like the word skibbity is just one of those words that doesn't stick around. And there's kind of three reasons for it. Like, for example, one, the word skibbity, it's really, really intrusive. Like, to say it, it just sounds way too funny. It's not like it's a funny word, it just sounds funny, and it doesn't really make sense to incorporate it in a normal conversation unless you're trying to be ironic, which is the second reason it didn't stick around. Because people didn't really use that word in a non-ironic context. Like, it doesn't make sense to use the word skibbity in a non-ironic context. And unless you're part of a very certain age group or you're an adult, you wouldn't use that word in a non-ironic context. And that brings me to part 3 of why that word didn't stick around, because it got used by adults. And that is the and that's basically why words like that don't stick around. Because as soon as an adult says it, it becomes not marginalized to a single group anymore, and instead, now everybody's using it. And it's not fun to use that word anymore because it doesn't separate you from anyone. And on top of being ironic and just way too intrusive in a conversation, that word just didn't make sense to use anymore, so nobody uses it anymore unless they're like a very certain age group of people who weren't old enough to figure out that we don't say that word anymore, and were around when that word was used for a brief amount of time unironically. And two, yeah, I don't know what the second part was.
Thank you. It reminds me of another really interesting thing, a metaphor you were developing in your paper, and you used this metaphor of a balloon to talk about things like that. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that, please?
So you can kind of view language, the relationship between language and culture is like a balloon, right? The language is really what separates the culture from dispersing out into the world around it. Like the air inside a balloon is the culture, and as soon as you get rid of the language for it, there's less, like, aside from like very distinct traditions, there's not a lot that makes it different from the other cultures around it. So by, for example, you pop that balloon by, if everybody speaks that language, then it's not special anymore, and it's not holding, that language, that culture in. Or if you try to assimilate it, that can also get rid of culture. And there's like a lot of times that this happened in history. Namely, like if you think of residential schools, those were designed to get indigenous children to stop speaking their languages, which is really bad because once you do that, it becomes harder to participate in cultural stuff. And you lose a lot of culture. And another way that this is happening is borrowing marginalized lingo. Like for example, if you say slay in a context where you're not part of the LGBTQ community, unironically, you are taking that word away from the LGBTQ community, and you're not making it kind of special anymore. And that word is not that word no longer becomes the thing that is holding that culture in. But luckily, the LGBT community is very good at making new words, so yeah.
Well, thank you. I think that was a really important illustration of how subtly we can appropriate or even destroy other cultures just by, me doing things like trying to say skibbity when I shouldn't do it, right? I have something else. This is a quote from a very famous person, and I thought it might be a bit of advice. When we were working on your paper, I mean, your content was brilliant, and we talked a lot about getting this well structured and taking the time to make your case because you had so much to share. So I'm going to do my best impersonation of this person, and maybe you can tell us a little bit. You had that slide about subject, verb, object, and that kind of thing.
Oh.
So you might. Let's see if I can do this, and if you can recognize this, right?
Go back to that.
Yeah, go back to your SBO kind of slide there. Oh, yeah, there we are. Right.
His
So
word order isn't here.
let's see if I can do this. Patience you must have. So advice from Yoda for you. So that seems weird to us because I would say, Max, you need to have some more patience here while we're working. Yoda says it very differently. Can you explain Yoda's way of talking using this?
So that word order is object, subject, verb. So in that sense, it's patience is the object. Subject is you. So patience you must have, and then have is the verb. And the thing about that word order is it's not really used by anybody except like a tribe in the Amazon. It's just the least common word order. And I don't know why. I just know that it's the least common word order in like one, maybe two languages use it.
Yeah, we talked a bit about that and how that was a way of making Yoda really stand out because words we could understand, but in an order that made them seem just a little bit strange for us. So last question here, and you kind of hinted at it in a couple of places, but can you tell us a little bit more about this idea of these large language models that are out there? You've talked about Proto-Indo-European and things.
Oh, you're not talking about large language models, but like
Not
families?
large language models. Pardon me, families rather. I'm getting your ChatGPT thing mixed up.
Yeah. So what he's talking about are the idea of like macro families and deep ancestry within language families, which is kind of like a debated topic in linguistics because, for one thing, the recognizable signs that a language is related to one another kind of disappear after 6,000 years, which is the reason that we were able to tell that languages like Russian, Hindi, Greek are all related. But beyond that, we don't know really what's related to English or not, or in Proto-Indo-European. So there's a lot of families like Uralic, which is also spoken in Europe and includes languages like Finnish, Estonian, and Hungarian, they're not related, and there's a couple ways that you can figure out whether like these groups are possibly related. And this is kind of a sensitive subject within linguists because of a few reasons. One might be nationalism. Two is just because we can't really prove any of this. So one way that you can look at this is, hold on, I'm going to skip ahead a whole bunch. You can use genetics. Let me just find this slide. This one. This is a very bad image of it, but essentially what's going on here is that there are two types of genetics. This is Y haplogroup. So it's like your father's father's father line back far enough that you can give it a type of a symbol. Like for example, all the European people originated from some guy over here who became everybody's like great 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 grandfather, except it's really complicated, but essentially you can mark different Y chromosomes with this. So right here we see that there's the N. I don't think anyone can see that, but right here it says N, and right here it says R. So the thing is, these two haplogroups aren't very closely related. In fact, N is actually more closely related to this one. This N is the Uralic haplogroup with Hungarian, Finnish, and all those languages, and R is the one with all the Indo-European languages. But the thing is, N is actually more closely related to O, and is a direct sibling of the O haplogroup. And the thing about the O-Y haplogroup is that that's the one that's spoken in that is common in China, Japan, Korea, parts of Southeast Asia, and even Polynesian peoples, as you can see here. So as far as we know, Uralic languages and Sino-Tibetan languages and a lot of these other languages aren't related. But if we were to follow genetics, it would look like they were, like very distantly, like tens of thousands of years ago. But if we were to follow Y haplogroup, just like similarity in location-based data, we could figure out, it would make more sense to find that Finnish, Uralic languages, and Indo-European languages are more closely related. But the problem with this is that you're just purely going off of this, it will tell you that Indo-European languages in the R haplogroup are related to the Q haplogroup, their best sibling, which is like most South American and parts of North American indigenous groups. And the thing is, that is very unlikely. But anyways, that was kind of a long rant, so any other questions?
Okay, we're going to go on to more questions from the floor, but I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned this a little bit with residential schools, but what do you think about the influence of globalization and the prevalence of English, how it's going to affect the history of words?
So yeah, English is kind of a problem here. I think that's kind of evident. But it's not necessarily English, but just like larger languages like Mandarin, English, lots of European languages like French especially, which are replacing like a lot of like African languages because of colonization, and so is English. But what they do is they get bigger, and speakers of the smaller languages often like decide not to learn their native language but to learn English because it gives them more opportunities. And this is bad because then we lose culture, like the balloon metaphor I said.